Alright, so this is going to be the video guide of how to build the Servita from the kit you've received. I'm doing a video because it's a little easier to follow than anything else. As great as that long guide is, it can still be a bit confusing, and seeing someone do it on video is definitely going to be the easiest way. One thing to note as you go through it, one of the main purposes of the Servita was to be designed as simple as it possibly could in a way that's accessible to everybody so that they can build their own. There's a lot of different, kind of kits out there for kids to learn and build stuff. There's not a ton out there for adults. So when this thing first went viral 2 years ago with the original monstrosity, it seemed like a good opportunity to create something cool for adults that also gives them a chance to do things that maybe they haven't done before. So this device right here is what you'll be building today. And with that said, we can get into it. All right, so your kit should look something like this. QR code for the paper build guide. And then all of the parts. If you're missing any, of course, reach out to support. We'll make sure to replace it, but everything should be in here. And of course, we're going to use the build guide as our guide for this, since it takes step by step how we should put it together. And it can be difficult to put together if things are done out of order. Well, let's go pocket by pocket, make sure you got everything. And here you're going to have the carriage. One thing to note, on the bill of materials, there's a linear guide bearing. That actually is already inside of the carriage. It's a press fit, and don't expect everybody to have an arbor press at home, so we went ahead and did that before we sent it out. On this side of it, you're going to have your wire cover, and some might have the PCB cover in there too. Some, the PCB cover might be up here. Over in the next pocket is the pump bracket. You're going to have your screws, miscellaneous hardware, and then the wires to connect everything. You're going to have your gantry motor here, a pump. This is a motor couple. The physical button you can use to mount on your project is in this hole. The hole came out slightly oversized, to be honest, so it tends to sink deep in there, but it will be in there. And then right here is the main board to drive the device. And obviously right here is the housing. Inside of there, you're gonna have the tubing you need to connect everything for the liquid. And then one thing to note in this slot is you have the lead screw, but that's not all. There's gonna be a spacer just to make sure that things don't bump into each other. And below that spacer is the guide rod. So make sure you don't miss this, it would be easy to miss. I'm gonna slide this out of the way and we're just gonna get started from step one. All right, for step one, you're gonna need the housing base, your packet of wires, and also the screws. The specific screws we'll be using are the self-tapping screws, which are the black ones with a point on them, and you should have a pack of like 25 or 30. Oh, and of course, we're mounting a limit switch. Doesn't matter which one, so we're gonna want one of the limit switches. Now everyone does have an Allen key, but if you do have a screwdriver that you can use, it is a bit easier to use something like this. Every single screw uses an H2 head, so anything you have will work that fits that. You'll have two 3-wire cables in there. For step one, we want to use the shorter of the two. And it's a little easier if we plug in the cable before we mount the limit switch. That way we're not trying to use pliers and squeeze it in there after the fact. But we want to mount the limit switch right here on the bottom. There's a slot for it. It's on the left side. And all we got to do is line it up. Make sure to bring the cable under that center post. And we'll go ahead and screw it in. You're gonna feel that the screw does tend to bite into the hole on the limit switch a little bit. That is completely okay. It's not gonna hurt anything. So when you get these hand tight, it can be a little hard to tell when you're there because they do bite pretty hard into the holes in the housing. But you'll know when it feels tight and you give it a wiggle and it doesn't move. If it's loose and wiggling, you're gonna wanna tighten it down just a little bit more. All right, so that's it on step one. Step two, we're gonna mount the gantry motor. All right, so to get the gantry motor in the easiest way possible, you wanna slide it in at a slight angle, and once it's in, you just rotate it over, and you can slide it forward and into place. Once you have that in place, and as close to flush with the motor mount as possible, so the face place of the motor as close to this motor mount as it can be, we're gonna go ahead and grab 3 of those machine screws, which are the silver ones that don't have a taper to them, and secure the motor to the housing. Awesome, we got all 3 in. One really important point here is if something's cross-threaded or maybe not seated all the way, the gap between the front of that motor plate and the bottom of the motor mount on the housing, you might see space there. You really don't want that, because if that's the case, it means this shaft is gonna be slightly offset, which is really gonna put stress on the motor as it's trying to raise and lower that gantry when you're completed. There is a fair amount of margin of error because of the couple we use, but you do wanna make sure it is as flush as it can possibly be. Awesome, so for the moment we are done with this. Slide that out of the way. The next step, we're gonna need that lead screw and the motor couple. This part's pretty straightforward. You might need to back out these set screws a little bit. But we're just gonna slide either end of the lead screw in. It will seat at the bottom. There's a ridge down there, so you can't put it in too far or not enough. And then tighten down those set screws so that they grab that lead screw. Perfect. We're gonna bring that housing base back over to finish this up. And to finish it, we're sliding that the other end of the couple onto the motor shaft. We're actually not gonna tighten it down yet. You'll see why later. And then take the guide rod and slide it into this slot on the left. One note is it is a pretty tight fit, but you'll feel it seat fully. It takes some force, and that's just to make sure it stays very straight. Cool. So now we are done with the base assembly. So next up, we're gonna add the nut to the gantry. And for that, we just need the gantry itself. As mentioned, one of the bearings is already in there. We need that brass looking piece, and we're gonna need 4 of the machine screws again, which are the silver ones. All right, we're gonna take the nut, slide it into the gantry, and align these holes. All right, once we have the holes aligned, one thing that can make it a little bit easier is take the tip of your Allen wrench or screwdriver or whatever, just open up those holes a little bit, since we aren't using the self-tapping ones. And that's gonna make it a lot easier to go ahead and tighten down these machine screws. Still might need some pressure to get it to bite. Once it does, screw it right on in. Just to hand tight. These don't have to be insanely tight. They're really not gonna take much force. Perfect. That's what it looks like all mounted up. All right, we're gonna thread on the gantry onto the base, which is why we didn't yet tighten this down. Linear bearing over the guide rod, lead screw right into the nut. And just thread that on. Once you're threaded, you're going to bring the gantry down just about an inch below the top of this housing. It'll make later assembly a lot easier. And now is when we're going to tighten down this couple to the motor. There's one really important note on here too. On the motor shaft, there's gonna be a flat part. We really wanna make sure that one of these set screws interfaces with it. This could be very easy, it could be difficult. It unfortunately just depends on where your motor shaft is in its rotation as it came manufactured. So to check, you just lift it up a bit. And so mine is on the back side. So not gonna be a particularly easy one. Make sure I align one of the set screws with it. And here's where this Allen key comes in massive handy, is it's small enough that I can get it back there to tighten that one down. If we tighten down that set screw just enough that it can still pass over the flat portion and limit the amount of rotations we have to give it, the easier this is gonna be. With that set screw just a little bit tightened, it's not gonna be able to fit onto any of the rounded portions, but once it's aligned with the flat portion, it will. And now I don't have to screw it in as much. And this is absolutely the single most frustrating part of this entire build. Once we're through this, it's smooth sailing. Oh, and I've been loosening it the whole time, not tightening it. God dang it. All right. Ooh, baby. Cool, so we got that tightened down. That's definitely a little frustrating to do, especially when you have one like this where the shaft flat is on the back side, because it can be really hard to access, but it is possible. And luckily from this point forward, nothing more like that. Now we're completely done with the housing base assembly for the time being. We're gonna go ahead and move that out of the way. We're gonna get the back panel. First thing we do with the back panel is we're gonna go ahead and attach the pump. Make sure to take off these black stoppers, not gonna need those anymore. Feed the wire down through the left side and set the pump into the top slot. And also, if you're doing the Duo, now's the time to open this. We're gonna start using some parts out of it. So in the Duo expansion, you're gonna have a second pump. Time to pull that guy out. Same thing, pull off the stoppers. And We're gonna put this in the bottom of the 2 pump slots. One thing to note in terms of alignment, you got an inlet and an outlet on each pump. The outlet's gonna be the one in the center. The inlet is the one that's offset from center. We want the one that's offset to be facing the bottom. It's gonna make routing the tubing a little easier later. And to secure these, it's pretty simple. You should have a pump bracket. It can only go on one way because of that notch. Go ahead and set it in place. We're gonna use 3 of the self-tapping screws to secure these. If you're not using 2 pumps, I would still use all 3 just to avoid any kind of vibration and noise. As we do it, we want to keep the face of the pump pretty much flush with this bracket. We'll do the middle one first. Go to top. And then I'll put in the bottom. And there we go, we got those mounted. Next step, we're going to put in the bulkhead fittings. In the regular kit, that'll be with the rest of the hardware. You want the fitting itself and the nut. Again, if you're doing the duo while we're doing this, you're going to have another one inside of there. These are very simple. Just press it from the outside in. And we'll go ahead and throw a nut on the back. And for these, just hand tight is fine. There's no reason to go get a wrench or anything. Just enough to make sure they don't back themselves out over time. All right, so now we're gonna route some tubing. And one thing to note is in the actual written guide, there's gonna be some diagrams in the back to help with this, to make sure all the tubing is routed from the right point to the right pump to the right nozzle. And that's so that everything we build aligns with what you're gonna see in the UI on the web app when we get to that. And it's always best to wash this before you use it, since it was just shipped. Just some just some dish soap and warm water is plenty. These tubes are made for this, so they do clean up pretty easy. Okay, so for tubing A, we want about 250 millimeters. Looks like, what, about 9 7/8 inches. I have a tendency to work in millimeters. I just think it's a little easier to visualize, and that's what I use to design. So you're gonna notice a lot of measurements are in millimeters, but it's a pretty easy conversion over to inches. Awesome, so that's tubing A. Then we want 180 millimeters for tubing C. Or just about 7 1/8 inches. So we're gonna do this first for the regular kit. We'll do the tubing for the duo second. First, let's run these. So I'm actually gonna take a look at our diagram at the back just to make sure I do this correctly on the first try. Awesome, so quick overview. Bulkhead 1, bulkhead 2, pump 2, pump 1. So we take our 250 millimeter piece of tubing, or tubing A. We're gonna go ahead from bulkhead 1. Should slide over, it's a pretty tight fit. We want to slide it all the way down so it's fully seated to the bottom. You can take that, slide it up through the right side of the device, and then onto the inlet fitting of pump 1, which is the bottom of the top one. It just slides right into place. Again, make sure it's fully seated, and there we go. Tubing C, we're going to set aside for now. We'll use that in a bit. Now, if you're doing the duo kit, you got to repeat this step one more time. We're going to create tubing B, which is 190 millimeters, or about dead on 7.5 inches. And then while we're here, we'll do tubing D, just 210 millimeters, or 8.25 inches. And okay, so tubing D can also go to the side for now. Now we're gonna run tubing B the same way we did tubing A, except this time we're going from bulkhead fitting 2, which is the top one, fully seated. We're gonna run it up and through, over top of pump 1. Feed it on in there. If it kinks at all, just give it a squeeze on the side, the kink will go away. And into the inlet of pump 2. Again, that's the bottom of the 2 ports on the pump. Fully seated. Done. Awesome. So that's all we're doing with the back panel for now. We can go ahead and set that to the side. Make a whole bunch of noise. All right, next, we're going to the top. We need another one of the limit switches. Should only have one left. And this time we're using the longer limit switch cable. I'm gonna go ahead and plug that in before. Again, it's just easier to do while it's out. And you're gonna see there's a little, I don't even quite know what I'd call that, but a little area we could feed the wire through. Again, I'm gonna do that before I mount it because it's easier. And that's just gonna make sure the wire stays out of the way when the device is in operation. And using 2 of those self-tapping screws, the black ones, we're gonna go ahead and mount this limit switch also. Perfect. All right, for the next step, we're still gonna be using the housing top and the self-tapping screws. Now for the regular kit, you should only have one piece of tubing left. With that piece of tubing, we're gonna go into, it's the right nozzle, but from our perspective currently it's on the left side. And you're just sliding that on in through until you see it makes contact with the front. One thing to note, it won't push all the way out. There's a ridge to make sure of it, so you want to be firmly seated against that ridge. Now if you're doing the duo, you have a second piece that's a bit longer, and that's gonna go on the other side. And same thing all the way through, fully seated to the front. And once those are fully in, got a bracket to secure those down. It's the small one that's gonna be in your hardware box. We're just gonna set that over top of the 1 or 2 pieces of tubing. Again, 2 if you're doing the duo, just 1 if you're just doing the regular kit. Using those self-tapping screws, we can secure this down into the housing. Perfect, we got that down. It's not meant to be all that tight. It's kind of just that. It's kind of just there to somewhat make sure that those tubes don't back out. So that's our 3 main assemblies completed, and now we're just gonna connect them together, and at that point it's gonna be fully assembled. So things should go pretty quick from here on out. So for the next step, we want the housing top and the back panel. And we're gonna go ahead and connect these together. I'm gonna run that limit switch cable out through the same side as the pump cables. And then align my housing right to the top. Using 3 of the machine screws, we're gonna go ahead connect these together. Again, just hand tight. We really don't want to go over tight on this. There's no need to. Once it's flat and in there, we're good. And so we're just going to tighten down until those 2 body panels become flush, and we're all right there. The next step is going to be these 2 pieces of tubing from the top that are not connected to anything. We need to connect these to the outlet of the pumps. If you're using one, you're just going to connect the one that you have to the outlet of pump 1. Again, the pump on the top. Kaboom. And then if you're doing the duo, we're going to connect that to the outlet of pump 2, which is somewhat counterintuitively the pump on the bottom. Well, there you go. Now the tubing's routed. We have the wires where we want them to be. This top and back panel assembly is completed, and we can bring back in the base assembly. Make sure I'm not skipping anything. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the wires from the base assembly. I'm routing the wire for the gantry motor through this little slot on the back, which just keeps it out of the way when we connect these together. Bring those in through the bottom of that same side we're putting all the wires. Kind of hold these together. Go to slide it down. You'll see it stops, and that's just because this carriage isn't quite aligned. We can use our hand to manipulate it a little bit until it seats. And then at the bottom, this will click together, and then you know everything is in place, fully aligned, and we're good to go. The next step is just screwing in a whole lot of these machine screws We have more screw points on this thing than would be necessary by far, and that's just to make sure that these plastic on plastic joints hold over the long term. All right, so we're gonna screw in every spot except one. That one is at the bottom right here, and I'll show you what we're gonna do there after I get all these in. So you wanna make sure to screw it in. You'll notice if the housing panel starts to bend out as you're screwing it in, you're probably not completely aligned with the hole. Maybe realign a little bit or put more pressure on that screw when you first start to get it to bite, and it'll prevent it from doing that. If it pulls out a little bit like it is here, that's totally okay. That's normal. It'll pull in as we tighten it down. What I was saying before though is if it like really starts to push out, that's where you're gonna wanna reset it and try again. But on this one, we're just kind of pulled out. That's okay. As it tightens down, it'll pull it into the spot it should be. Again, we're gonna keep screwing these in everywhere except right here. Just hand tight. They do tend to somewhat go in like kind of like a star pattern when you're tightening down a wheel on a car. Don't know that it's overly necessary for something like this, but it can't hurt. Okay, everything's in except for this one I pointed out that we're not going to do yet. For that, we're going to get the screw, but it's a black screw, machine screw, slightly shorter than the rest. The reason why this one's different is the new motors we sourced are actually ever so slightly wider than the ones previously. So the screws we were using couldn't fully seat in that, and instead of doing like a total redesign for one screw, it's better just to get a new screw just for that slot. So that's going to go into this bottom right. And it's black just to make sure that we can clearly see the difference of which one is different. Since it's only about 1 or 2 millimeters shorter than the rest of them, it can be hard to tell visually. All right, so we've got all the screws in. We're going to want to give it a once over to make sure everything is aligned still. So you'll see right here, I've got a bit of a bulge going on right here. And that's just due to these two screws not yet being fully seated. So we're going to go ahead and tighten those down a little bit. All right, give it another once over. Make sure we don't have any major gaps or anything, and we sure don't. Everything pulled together very nicely. And that's that. The main unit is now completely assembled and ready to go. And up next, we need to put in the circuit boards. All right, so the best way to do this is we're gonna take all of our wires and we're gonna feed them through into where the PCB is housed. Maybe, there we go. Like so. So that's all the wires for the main kit. If you're doing the Duo expansion, your pump wire, that's gonna be the longer of the two, it's gonna go through into the same area, but through the bottom slot here, so that it can reach the Duo expansion circuit board. And once we have all those through, finally time to grab our circuit board. And start plugging everything in. So the way this is labeled makes it pretty easy, but the top limit switch is going to go ahead and plug right into the top limit switch. The bottom limit switch, plug into the bottom limit switch. The gantry motor goes into motor 2, and then the pump is going to go into motor 1. There we go, we got all those plugged in. Now this next part is if you're doing the Duo. You grab your Duo expansion board. Drop it for good measure. And on this one, the only slot on the back is going to be for that second pump. All right. Then we're going to connect these together. Connect those together. We're going to slide those wires kind of back out as we put the circuit board down. And now using those black self-tapping screws again, we can go ahead and screw down all 4 or 8 points, depending on if you're just doing the regular or if you're the Duo expansion. One thing I should note is if you're ever adding a Duo down the road or something, make sure the device is powered off before you plug in this Duo expansion. You just run some risk if you plug all those connectors in while the device is on. So again, make sure it's off, plug it in, re-secure everything, and then power it back up. Cool. Once that's secured, we're going to get our wire cover. And it does only go on one way. The longer side is going to face the front of the device, and the shorter side will face the circuit board. We'll put the wire cover in its notch and snap it into place. And there, now all those are covered and it looks pretty. Our very last step, take our PCB cover, go ahead and snap it into place a little bit, and use 2 of those self-tapping screws to screw it down. Alright, it's me from the future. While I'm cutting this together, I realized I skipped something, so the video's about to jump ahead a little bit to cover the step that was missed, and then we'll come right back to where we were. Just wanted to mention it so that people don't get too confused. Okay, device is now plugged in. I forgot one thing while we were going through the building. I forget it every time, but it is actually really helpful. Inside your kit, you're gonna have some food grade grease in there, a little packet of it. We wanna open that with scissors, I guess. And then we're gonna put, I don't know, just a bit of it onto your finger. And we wanna put that onto the lead screw of the device. So I'm just gonna take it and slather that lead screw with grease. I'll go top and bottom. And good. And to spread that out, we'll run the carriage up and down manually, and that'll make sure that the entire lead screw is greased. For now, just get it on there. And there you go. You have now built a full smart home device completely from scratch at your home. We will get into the first power up in a second, but take a second, let your wrists rest, because it's a lot of screwing things in, and get a drink or something. So next we're gonna get into the first power up, and it's actually pretty cool. When we first did all this, we went down the road of building an app and all that, and it was great, but it ran the risk of, let's say this project in the near future, it just doesn't pan out, we can't do it anymore, and we stop supporting it or something. With an app, you run the risk of every single person who's bought one, when that app goes out of support, all the devices could just stop working. If it's running off of a third-party server that we're paying for, and we can no longer do so, then everyone who bought one's gonna be left with a brick. So about the time of the Kickstarter, we decided to do a complete redesign of that. We completely scrapped the app, because that was a risk that we just weren't willing to take. We don't want a situation where somebody buys one and then 6 months down the road, it doesn't work anymore because something on the business side didn't work out. And since this is a project, not a product, if we were paying thousands of dollars a month to support an app, that would certainly be a possibility. So what we did instead is we created a locally hosted web app that this circuit board on here actually hosts itself. So that means no matter what happens to our team or the project in total, your device is completely in control of its future and cannot be taken away. Now, on to the first power up. Inside of your box, you're gonna have a power supply. Should be the only thing left in there at this point. And just like everything else on Earth, we plug it in. All right, just make sure you have power. Power supply should have a blue LED lit up on it. And we're gonna go ahead and plug the board in. You're gonna see a power LED come on. Oop. Power LED comes on just to show that the board has power. You can see a green light, which is just a status LED. The guide will go over each of those colors and what they mean. If you have the Duo board in there, if you have the Duo board in there also, there's an LED there too. Again, just confirming that it is receiving power. And the device is now on. So to connect to it, when it first powers up, it's gonna enter AP mode, which means it just acts as an access point, and it's actually fully functional just like that. When you search for a Wi-Fi, it'll come up as Servita. Go ahead and connect to it. And then to actually connect to the device, we're gonna do http:// and we don't want to put that into a Google search. We want to put it into our web address. Okay, so you put in that address and it's going to bring up the settings page. You have kind of two options from here. First is going to be you can set all your settings like this and leave the device off of Wi-Fi. It never has to connect if you don't want it to. I know there are some people that really don't like connected devices, and so that's why we did it this way. You can still get in there, change the settings without having to use an app, connect it to Wi-Fi, and go through all that. However, maybe you do want it connected to Wi-Fi, so that way you don't have to go in and connect to this as a Wi-Fi network every time you want to change settings. Maybe you're going to connect to a smart home, whatever reason you want that connectivity might be. Now's the time to do it. So to connect it to Wi-Fi, we'll go into settings. You can go ahead and type in your network name and password and click submit. And then at that point, it will drop off of AP mode and it'll become a connected device just like all the IoT devices we're used to. No need to do that for me right now for the sake of this. So I'm gonna go back to the settings page. To make sure everything's wired properly, I'm gonna open the manual controls page, play around with it a bit, make sure everything behaves as we expect. So I'll go ahead and move the gantry up, works, move it down, works. We can run our pumps. Everything seems to work as expected. Now to spread out that grease, I'm gonna go ahead and hold it down, send it to the bottom, and then we're gonna move it back to the home position all the way at the top. And running through that full cycle is just gonna spread that grease fully up and down the lead screw. Cool. Looks like everything's wired correctly, device is behaving as expected, which means we are good to go and install it into our project. We'll do a real quick overview of the rest of the things on here. Up on the first page, we got pour drink. You can set your pour size for each one with this slider. If the slider's blue, it just means it's communicating the change of settings. If it turns green, it means the settings have been communicated and the device has confirmed that the changes have been accepted. So you'll see it changes pretty rapidly. You got drink 1, drink 2. And I have the duo board in, or I should clarify one thing. Since I have the duo board, I have drink 1, 2, and 3. 1 is pump 1, drink is pump 2, drink 3 is a combination of the two. If you only have the main board, you're only gonna see drink 1, and that is done on purpose so that it's not confusing seeing all of them when they don't actually function. So you change the sizes of each, the proportions for drink 3, it is limited to 20. The next page, we've got our LED color. Same thing with the sliders to confirm setting changes. We've got a little readout of what that color should look like. Each LED strip can be slightly different. And again, the sliders are going to confirm that those changes went through. If you have the LEDs and you don't want them on at all, feel free to just turn brightness to 0 and or move all those values down to 0, and that will turn them off. Manual controls, we already know that one. And then the settings page. So we do still have the ability to lock the device, even through power cycle. That setting will remain. And that's just to maybe you want to make sure the physical buttons don't get pressed or something. You don't want the device go off for a period of time for any reason. You've got friends over who are thieves, so you go ahead and lock the device, and it is not going to work unless you unlock it through this app. And then up next is the Wi-Fi credentials. We touched on that already. And lastly, the number of LEDs. Since this is designed to drive addressable LEDs and not just strictly RGB LEDs, you get a lot more control over the LEDs. It's pretty cool. But you do have to know the specific number of LEDs in that strip. And if it varies from the standard preset of 60, you just need to go ahead and change that and click submit. And then they'll all light up as expected. And that's it. That is the full video guide of how to build the Servita. I will go over installation of this into a project soon, but I just want to get this video out right now since things are now shipping. And I am waiting on parts for what I'm going to install this into, so I can't do it today.